Stone foundations on remote cliffs hold a secret older than history itself. These coastal cliff ruins are the silent markers of a maritime culture that mastered the ocean long before any written record. By the end of this, you will see how a single stone can shatter the entire timeline of human civilization. Why would anyone build a permanent home on a wave-shattered precipice? And what forgotten knowledge allowed them to thrive there? What does it say about us when the oldest stories might not be found in books, but written in stone against the sea? How much of our past is still waiting to be discovered, not in the ground, but just beyond the shoreline? The map tells a story the history books do not. If you trace a line from the storm-lashed fjords of Norway, across the windswept isles of Scotland's Hebrides, down to the sun-baked cliffs of Peru, and then across the vast Pacific to the volcanic shores of Molokai and the rugged coastlines of Japan, you will find the same mysterious signature etched into the landscape. In every one of these places, and in dozens more, you find the remains of sophisticated stone structures built not in safe, sheltered valleys, but on the very edge of the world where land meets the endless ocean. This is not a coincidence, it is a pattern, and patterns are the language of intention. What we are looking at is evidence of a global phenomenon, a shared idea that took root in the minds of ancient peoples separated by thousands of miles of open water. The sheer geographical spread of these sites forces a profound question upon us. How could cultures that, according to conventional timelines, should have had no knowledge of each other, all arrive at the same astonishing conclusion? The conclusion that the most logical, the most strategic, the most sacred place to build a permanent home was on a precarious cliff overlooking the sea. The environmental clues are strikingly consistent. These are not easy places to live. Building here required moving massive stones up treacherous slopes, often without the wheel or draft animals. It meant contending with salt spray that withers crops and relentless winds that test everything. Each block was painstakingly shaped to fit against its neighbors with such precision that the wall becomes a single, flexible entity. This technique, seen in places like the Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru or the mysterious structures on Japan's Yonaguni coast, allows the construction to shift and settle without cracking, to absorb the tremendous energy of storm winds and even seismic tremors, dissipating the force throughout the entire structure. It is architecture designed to move, to breathe with the land, because the builders understood that rigidity on a dynamic coastline is a recipe for collapse. They also understood deflection. Many of these coastal walls are not vertical, they are subtly angled. This is not an aesthetic choice, it is a calculated one. By sloping the face of a wall, the constant, punishing wind is guided up and over the structure, rather than slamming directly into it. It is the same principle behind the angled hull of a ship designed to cut through water. These builders were applying naval architecture to their homes, treating the wind as another current to be navigated. Then there is the foundation, the most telling detail of all. In numerous sites, the lowest courses of stone are not simply placed on the ground, they are carved from it. The builders used the living bedrock of the cliff as the literal cornerstone of their construction, chiseling sockets and channels so that the man-made walls grew seamlessly out of the natural stone. This does more than provide stability, it marries the structure to the geology itself, anchoring it against erosion in a way no freestanding foundation ever could. This suite of techniques reveals a profound and specialized knowledge. It shows an intimate understanding of coastal hydrology, knowing how salt crystallizes and breaks apart weaker materials. It demonstrates a grasp of geology, selecting specific stone types that could endure constant wetting and drying. This is not the architecture of tentative newcomers to the coast. It is the signature of a people who had studied the sea's every mood for generations. They were not fighting the ocean, they were learning its language and building in harmony with its rules. The resilience of these sites, standing defiantly while centuries of storms have washed away entire beaches, tells us something crucial. These were not seasonal fishing camps or temporary lookouts. This was permanent, vital settlement. The investment of labor, the sophistication of the engineering, the clear intention for longevity, all point to a culture for whom the wild, exposed coast was not a frontier to be feared, but the only home they could imagine. They built for the ages because they intended to stay. But when did this mastery of stone and sea actually take place? This is where the mystery deepens into a profound scientific puzzle, a chronological conundrum that challenges our most basic tools for understanding the past. These ruins present a unique and frustrating problem for archaeologists. They are often built entirely of stone, lacking the charcoal, bone, or wooden artifacts that allow for reliable carbon dating. It is like trying to determine the age of a mountain using only a calendar. The scale is all wrong. So scientists have had to become detectives of deep time, employing ingenious and indirect methods to coax answers from the silent stone. One approach is to look not at the structure but at the land it sits upon, a technique called optically stimulated luminescence dating, or OSL, measures when quartz grains in the soil were last exposed to sunlight. By analyzing the sediment trapped beneath a foundational stone, researchers can determine a minimum age for when that stone was placed, sealing the earth from light. In several coastal cliff sites, OSL readings have returned startling numbers, pointing to construction events in the early Holocene period, over 10,000 years ago. This is an epoch when mainstream historical narratives describe humanity as nomadic hunter-gatherers, not as builders of sophisticated, permanent maritime settlements. Another line of evidence comes from the sea itself. These structures have a fixed relationship to the waterline. By studying ancient shorelines and mapping precise global sea level changes, a science that has grown incredibly detailed, researchers can work backwards. If a ruin's lowest platform is now 20 feet above the high tide mark, but geological data shows that sea level was exactly at that platform's height 8,000 years ago, it strongly suggests the builders were utilizing that contemporary shoreline. Correlations like this across multiple sites build a compelling, if broad, chronological framework, placing many of these ruins in a window of time stretching from 12,000 to 6,000 years before the present. Then there is the stone's own skin, the patina. This thin layer of weathering, a complex chemical film that forms on rock surfaces over millennia, grows at a rate influenced by climate. By analyzing its composition and thickness, some researchers attempt to estimate exposure time. This method, however, is deeply controversial, as patina growth is not a perfect clock. It can be accelerated by acid rain or scrubbed away by storms. Yet even these controversial data points often whisper the same unsettling age, pointing to antiquity far beyond recorded history. The true revelation, however, may lie in the very difficulty of the task. The struggle to pin down a precise date for these cliffside ruins is itself a monumental clue. It suggests we are not dealing with a culture that fits neatly into our established historical boxes, but with something far older, a civilization whose timeline is so extended it begins to merge with the slow, geological processes of the coast itself. Their works are not merely old, they are of an age that forces archaeology to stretch its methods to the breaking point. This chronological puzzle is the core of the mystery, for every uncertain date, every conflicting result, chips away at the conventional timeline of human progress. It paints a picture of a maritime people not at the dawn of history, but perhaps at the dawn of our current geological age, mastering their world from the edge of the continents while the great ice sheets were still in retreat. What does it mean for our story if the builders came before the farmers, if the sailors mapped the world before the scribes invented writing? The stones on the cliffs hold their chronology close, and in their silence they ask us to reconsider everything. The question of why is as compelling as the question of when. To understand these ancient mariners, we must step onto those wind-whipped cliffs and see the world through their eyes. The first and most immediate theory is one of security. In a world without standing armies or border walls, elevation was the ultimate defense. A cliffside settlement is a natural fortress, its sheer face a daunting barrier to any approach from the land. The sea below acted as a vast, impassable moat, while the single, easily watched path up from the water allowed for complete control over who came and went. This was not just about safety from other human groups, it was also about sanctuary from the large terrestrial animals that once roamed the continents. By choosing the precipice, these communities turned their greatest vulnerability, their exposure to the open ocean, into their most formidable strength, creating a citadel where they could focus on the sea without fear of what approached from behind. Yet defense alone does not explain the panoramic scale of the view. From these heights, the horizon stretches in a perfect, unbroken circle. This suggests a second, more active purpose: surveillance and communication. These sites functioned as the control towers of the ancient world. Lookouts could spot schools of fish from miles away, directing canoes to the richest harvests. More profoundly, they could see other vessels. In an era before compasses or charts, a fire lit on a high promontory at night was a beacon of incredible power, a star on Earth guiding sailors home or marking a safe harbor. A series of such points along a coast could form a relay system, a primitive but effective network for sending messages across vast distances far faster than any runner. This transforms the coastline from a simple habitat into a connected circuit, with each cliff settlement a vital node in a maritime information web. But the alignment of some structures points to a purpose that transcends the purely practical. Several of these ruins are oriented with precise, intentional geometry toward specific points on the horizon where the sun or moon rises or sets during solstices or equinoxes. This turns the meeting point of sea and sky into a giant natural observatory. For a culture that lived by the rhythms of the ocean tides, currents, seasonal migrations, tracking celestial cycles was not abstract science, it was essential survival. Marking these solar and lunar events over the water may have woven timekeeping, navigation, and spirituality into a single practice. The cliff became an altar, the horizon a sacred line where the heavens touched their world, and the structure itself a stone calendar ensuring they were in harmony with the cosmos. There is also a deeply pragmatic argument rooted in marine ecology. Some of these precarious perches sit directly above submarine canyons or deep water upwellings, places where nutrient-rich cold water rises to the surface, creating incredibly dense and reliable fisheries. Other sites align with known migratory paths of whales or sea turtles. Building directly above these marine highways provided a direct, almost vertical access to the most abundant resources the ocean had to offer. The difficulty of hauling tools and catch up the cliff face was outweighed by the certainty of the bounty below. It was a strategic economic decision, placing their homes at the doorstep of their most vital supermarket. Ultimately, the very hardship of these locations is the most telling clue. The immense effort required to build and sustain life on a cliff speaks to a culture that prioritized specific values above all else: security, visibility, spiritual connection, and unimpeded access to the sea. They chose the challenge of the precipice because what it offered was worth any cost. This was not a people clinging to the edge of survival. They were masters of a chosen domain, engineers who shaped forbidding landscapes into thriving, permanent homes. Their architectural enigma is a statement in stone, declaring that for them, the center of the world was not a sheltered valley, but the wild, open frontier where the land ends. The true scale of this lost civilization may be hidden not on the cliffs but beneath the waves. This is the profound, landscape-altering fact that changes everything. When these structures were first raised, the coastline looked nothing like it does today. We are living in a world that has been dramatically reshaped by the end of the last great ice age. As colossal glaciers melted, global sea levels rose by over 120 meters, a slow, relentless inundation that swallowed entire continents of coastal land. What we see today as a lonely cliff was 10,000 years ago often a gentle slope leading down to a vibrant coastal plain, or perhaps the sheltered shore of a deep, protected bay. The ruins perched so precariously on the edge were not built on the edge at all. They were constructed in sensible, accessible locations that only became isolated precipices as the oceans climbed for millennia, cutting away the land around them. This realization transforms our understanding completely. The cliff-top ruins are not the whole story. They are merely the surviving high-ground remnants, the last stubborn sentinels of a much more extensive world that now lies submerged. They are the tips of mountains whose bases are drowned. This is where underwater archaeology becomes our most vital tool for time travel. In the clear, quiet waters off the coasts of India, in the Baltic Sea, and near the Yonaguni Monument in Japan, divers and sonar scans have begun to map drowned landscapes. They are finding not just scattered artifacts, but the very geography of a lost epoch. Submerged river channels, ancient freshwater springs now bubbling on the seafloor, and vast plains that were once fertile hunting grounds tell a story of a habitable, inviting coastline. More startling are the potential human-made features, lines of stones that resemble breakwaters or harbor walls, circular foundations on now flooded terraces, and arrangements of rock that defy natural explanation. These sunken clues suggest the cliff sites we can visit were likely connected to lower settlements, ports, and fishing villages that have vanished beneath the sea. Imagine a thriving maritime community with its docks and homes on the sheltered shore, its farms on the coastal plain, and its ceremonial or defensive structures on the higher ground behind it. As the waters rose, generation after generation would have been forced to retreat upward, abandoning the lower tiers to the sea until only the highest, most resilient stone buildings remained, left stranded on an island of rock. The civilization did not necessarily vanish. It was compressed and displaced, its earliest and most expansive chapters permanently flooded. Therefore, understanding the precise timeline of post-glacial sea level rise is not just background science, it is the master key to reconstruction. By charting how quickly and when the ocean reached certain heights, scientists can create paleogeographic maps, essentially blueprints of the ancient world. They can show us the moment when a particular ruin transitioned from being a central hill within a settlement to an isolated coastal fort. This chronological mapping allows us to visualize the true layout of this ancient maritime culture, not as a series of lonely outposts, but as a connected network of communities spread across now vanished coastal territories. The implications are staggering. It suggests that the visible ruins are a tiny, fragmented sample of what once existed. For every stone wall we find on a cliff today, there could be an entire submerged village, a forgotten harbor, or a ceremonial complex lying in the silent darkness offshore. Our picture of this culture has been, quite literally, eroded down to its highest surviving bones. The vast majority of its physical legacy, the places where daily life truly unfolded, rests on the continental shelves under layers of sediment and centuries of ocean. This transforms the mystery from a question of who built these few strange structures to a question of how much of our own past is still waiting to be rediscovered, not in the earth but in the eternal, shifting blue of the sea. The stones have their chronology, but the people kept their history in a different vault, the human voice. Across the globe, the indigenous communities whose ancestors have lived along these same coastlines for untold generations hold stories that echo the silent testimony of the ruins. These are not simple tales for entertainment. They are intricate oral traditions, detailed mythic memories that speak of a world shaped by water. In the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia's northern coasts, there are accounts of the great spirit beings who formed the land when the sea levels were much lower, describing ancient shorelines and river systems that geography confirms existed over 10,000 years ago. Along the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Haida and Tlingit recount the time of the Great Flood, when the waters rose and their people were forced to move to higher ground, an event deeply woven into their identity. And from the Celtic shores of Cornwall and Brittany come the haunting legends of Lyoness, a fertile, low-lying kingdom said to have vanished beneath the waves in a single catastrophic night, its church bells still heard ringing from beneath the sea during storms. The uncanny consistency of these flood myths from every continent is the first clue that we are hearing more than metaphor. When a story describes the specific shape of a bay that is now underwater, or names an island that no longer appears on any map, it ceases to be just a legend and becomes a potential waypoint, a coordinate in time. These narratives often contain precise, practical knowledge disguised as myth. A story about a hero traveling to an island home of the gods might encode sailing directions, star navigation paths, or the location of a rich fishing ground that was an island millennia ago. A tale of a great wave that swallowed the homes of the first people could be the preserved memory of a real tsunami, a cataclysmic event that reshaped the community's relationship with the coast forever. The characters in these stories, often described as the first people who came from the sea or powerful beings who taught the arts of fishing and boat building, could be distant, mythologized recollections of that very maritime culture that built the Cliffside ruins. The timescales involved are almost incomprehensible. For an oral tradition to accurately preserve the geographical details of a coastline from over 7,000 years ago, it would have to be passed down through over 300 generations without breaking its essential core. Skeptics argue this is impossible, that stories mutate beyond recognition in mere centuries. Yet the resilience of these traditions suggests a sophisticated cultural technology for preservation, using rhythm, song, ceremony, and strict lineage of storytellers to act as a living library. The stories were not casual recounts, they were sacred responsibilities, the DNA of a people's identity. When we layer these oral histories onto the archaeological and geological maps, something remarkable happens. The mythical drowned lands often align with areas we know were submerged by post-glacial sea level rise. The described journeys between islands match land bridges that existed when the oceans were lower. This correlation suggests these traditions are not random creations, but rooted in lived experience, in a collective memory of a different world. They are the echo of a time when the geography was familiar, and the trauma of its loss was so profound it became the central story of who they are. To dismiss these accounts as mere fairy tales is to ignore a vital line of evidence. The stones tell us what was built and where, but the stories tell us why it mattered, who the builders might have been, and the cataclysm that separated them from their descendants. They give a voice to the silent ruins, offering names, motivations, and emotions to a people otherwise known only by their handiwork. In this light, the cliff ruins and the flood myths are two halves of the same record, one etched in rock, the other in memory, both pointing to the same lost chapter in the human story, a chapter written on shores that have long since disappeared beneath the waves. The walls themselves may point the way to the next piece of the puzzle. Among the most compelling architectural mysteries at these coastal sites is a pattern of precise alignment, where specific walls, narrow doorways, or carved symbols are oriented not toward the land or the nearby sea, but toward the distant horizon where the sky meets the water. Detailed surveys have revealed that at numerous ruins, a particular stone corridor frames the exact point on the horizon where the sun rises on the summer solstice. At another, a set of petroglyphs lines up with the southernmost setting point of the moon, an event that only happens every 18.6 years. These are not random placements, they are deliberate fixed markers etched into the landscape, turning the entire cliff into a giant, permanent astronomical instrument. This celestial knowledge was far more than ritual. For a culture that ventured onto the open ocean, it was the difference between life and a journey with no return. Before the magnetic compass, the only reliable guides across the featureless blue were the sun, the moon, and the stars. The Polynesians, for instance, memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, using them as a star compass to hold a course across thousands of miles of open Pacific. The Vikings used a similar system, navigating by the sunstone and the constant northern star. The alignments found in these ruins suggest the builders possessed this same sophisticated understanding, but they took the extraordinary step of building their reference points into the bedrock. Imagine a master navigator teaching an apprentice. Instead of just pointing to the sky, they could walk to a specific stone wall and say, "See that notch in the distant hills when the star called Arcturus rises there? It is time to begin the voyage to the summer fishing grounds." Or stand here at dawn on the shortest day of the year, and the sun will shine directly through this doorway, marking the turning point of the season. This architecture formalized the knowledge, making it a communal, transferable science. This transforms the sites from simple settlements into something much more profound: integrated coastal observatories. They were classrooms, calibration stations, and cosmic calendars all in one. A navigator returning from a long voyage could verify his celestial readings by checking them against the fixed alignments of the home cliff. The structures provided a stable, unchanging truth against which the moving heavens could be measured. This implies a taught and standardized system, a curriculum of the stars and stones that was passed down through generations. It was the global positioning system of the ancient world, a network of fixed points that allowed mariners to know where they were in a vast and trackless world by referencing where they were in the cosmos. The true brilliance of this system is how it seamlessly wove the spiritual and the practical into a single worldview. The solstice sun was not just a navigational beacon, it was a deity, a life-giver whose return promised longer days and warmer seas. The star used to guide a canoe to a distant island might also be the resting place of an honored ancestor. By carving these celestial events into their most permanent homes, the builders were declaring that their survival, their journeys, and their very sense of meaning were all part of a single, harmonious order. They read the sky to master the sea, and then they embedded that cosmic map into the land itself, creating a sacred geography where every voyage began and ended under the watchful, measured gaze of the heavens. This enigma shows a culture thinking in epochs, building a legacy meant to outlast not just individual lives, but the very memory of why they built it, trusting that the stars would forever return to the slots they had carved in stone. But to truly know the builders, you must look not just at their grand designs, but at their smallest gestures, the faint scars left by the tools in their hands. The stones themselves hold these microscopic diaries, a record of the technology used to shape them. At many of the oldest coastal sites, a curious absence speaks volumes. The surfaces lack the sharp, clean grooves and drill marks characteristic of iron or bronze chisels. Instead, the tool marks are often broader, more rounded, or show a pecking pattern, signatures that point to implements made of stone, bone, or hard wood. This is a technology level that mainstream archaeology typically associates with the Neolithic, a period of simple farming villages, not with the architects of complex, ocean-facing citadels. The implication is jarring. It suggests the builders achieved this monumental precision with what we would consider primitive tools, a feat that demands a complete rethinking of their skill and societal coordination. The mystery deepens with the material they chose to conquer. At sites from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, we find structures built from basalt and granite, some of the hardest stones on the planet. Shaping these materials with stone hammers and bone points is not merely difficult, it is an act of profound patience and generational commitment. It requires a deep, intuitive understanding of the stone's crystalline structure, knowing exactly where to strike to cleave a block along its natural grain. The resulting surfaces often have a distinctive, dimpled texture, like a gentle hammered leather, a testament to thousands upon thousands of careful, calculated blows. This is not haphazard construction. It is a slow, meditative art form, where the act of building was as much a cultural ritual as a practical task. When researchers compare these tool marks to those from known prehistoric cultures like the quarry sites of ancient Egypt's pre-dynastic period or the megalithic temples of Malta, the comparisons are often startling. The techniques show remarkable similarity, suggesting a shared, widespread knowledge base in stoneworking that transcends conventional geographic and chronological boundaries. Yet, the coastal ruins frequently display a mastery and scale that pushes the envelope of what we thought possible with those tools. The perfect 90-degree corners, the seamless joints, the complex angles cut into immovable bedrock, all achieved without metal, speak of a guild of artisans whose expertise was honed over centuries. These silent signatures are the true fingerprints of the builders. A rounded peck mark tells of a stone hammer held in a calloused hand. A long, shallow scrape might hint at a shark's tooth or a piece of sharpened seashell used for fine finishing. The choice of toolstone itself, perhaps a specific type of river cobble imported from miles inland, reveals trade networks and an understanding of material science. This microscopic evidence paints an intimate portrait of their daily life. It was a life of rhythmic labor, of communal effort where the shaping of a single cornerstone could be a shared endeavor, embedding the identity of the entire community into the very fabric of their home. The disruptive result of this analysis is clear. The technological timeline we have constructed is called into question. If a culture using Neolithic-level tool technology could produce work that rivals the precision of the Bronze Age, then perhaps our categories are wrong. Perhaps skill, knowledge, and cultural determination are far more powerful forces than the simple material of a tool. The cliff ruins stand not as monuments to advanced metallurgy, but to advanced humanity, to a forgotten school of engineering where the primary tools were profound patience, acute observation, and a stone-cutter's intimate dialogue with the earth. To understand the silent architects of the cliffs, we can listen to the echoes of history's greatest sailors. Cultures like the Phoenicians, the Polynesians, and the Vikings left behind not just ruins, but stories and shipwrecks that detail a life married to the sea. By studying these historically recorded maritime societies, we can build a template, a living model to help us reverse engineer the invisible culture implied by those ancient stones. Each offers a different lens. The Phoenicians, for instance, were master traders of the Mediterranean, establishing coastal colonies and trading posts from Lebanon to Spain. Their expansion was driven by commerce, a search for metals like tin and silver. They built fast, durable ships from cedar, capable of long voyages, and their society was oriented around port cities and mercantile networks. This shows us that a maritime culture can be economically complex, centered on the exchange of goods and ideas across vast distances, with settlements strategically placed for resource access and trade winds. Now consider the Polynesians, whose achievement is perhaps the most stunning parallel. Starting from island Southeast Asia, they undertook the most ambitious exploration in human history, discovering and settling virtually every habitable island across the vast Pacific Ocean, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui. They did this without metal tools, without the wheel, and crucially, without a written language. Their knowledge was entirely oral and experiential, encoded in chants, star charts, and the feel of ocean swells against the hull. They built double-hulled voyaging canoes capable of carrying families, plants, and animals across thousands of miles of open ocean. Their expansion was driven by a mix of resource scarcity, population pressure, and a profound spiritual quest for new lands. They prove unequivocally that a sophisticated, technologically adept, and geographically vast civilization can rise, thrive, and remember its history entirely outside the framework of written records or permanent stone cities on continents. Then we have the Vikings of Scandinavia, fierce explorers who used their advanced longships to raid, trade, and settle from North America to the rivers of Russia. Their society was highly decentralized, organized around chieftains and kinship groups, with a deep-seated cultural value placed on exploration and mastery of the sea. Their ship technology, with its shallow draft and flexible construction, allowed them to navigate not just open oceans but also rivers, giving them unparalleled access inland. This teaches us that a maritime culture can be fluid in its social structure, adaptable in its goals, and capable of exploiting both coastal and riverine environments. When we hold this template up to the cliff ruins, the implications come into sharp focus. The ruins suggest permanent, defensible home bases, much like the Viking fortified settlements or Phoenician coastal citadels. The celestial alignments hint at a navigation system as sophisticated as the Polynesian star compass, permanently etched into the landscape instead of memorized in chants. The choice of inaccessible locations points to a society that, like all these cultures, prioritized security and a commanding view of their maritime domain. The global distribution of similar sites suggests not isolated tribes, but a network of connected communities, perhaps linked by trade like the Phoenicians, by exploration like the Polynesians, or by a combination of both. This comparative analysis does more than fill in blanks. It animates the stones. It moves us from seeing a mysterious wall to envisioning the society that needed it. We start to see not just a lookout post, but the home base for deep-sea fishermen who read the waves like the Polynesians. We see not just a defensible perch, but the fortified warehouse of traders who, like the Phoenicians, exchanged rare shells, obsidian, or knowledge across coastal highways. We see not just a ceremonial platform aligned with the stars, but the training ground for navigators whose mental maps of the ocean were as detailed as any parchment chart. These known cultures demonstrate that the ocean is not a barrier, but a connector for those who possess the knowledge to cross it. They show that monumental construction and seafaring prowess are not sequential developments, but can emerge together from a deep cultural orientation toward the water. By using them as our guide, we begin to hear the faint sounds of a lost world. The creak of ropes on a wooden hull setting out from a stone-lined harbor, the shouted directions from a cliff-top watchtower, the shared stories of a journey under unfamiliar stars. The ruins are the anchor points of that world, the fixed places they always return to, the silent testament to a people for whom the sea was not the edge of the map, but the very center of it. Their mastery of the sea was written not only in stone, but in their discarded meals. To understand how a permanent culture could flourish on those exposed cliffs, we must sift through their ancient refuse, the layered midden heaps that act as time capsules of daily life. These are not simple piles of trash, they are detailed economic ledgers, revealing a diet of astonishing variety and sophistication. Analysis shows a consistent bounty, deep-sea fish like tuna and cod, whose capture requires venturing far from shore alongside shellfish, seals, dolphins, and the eggs and meat of seabirds. This is not the menu of desperate survivors. It is the curated harvest of specialists who understood the ocean's rhythms with intimate precision. They possessed the technology and knowledge to hunt in open water, to harvest from treacherous rocks, and to exploit every niche of their marine environment across all seasons. The bones tell a story of planned abundance, of a people so adept at harvesting the sea that they could support a stable, settled community high above the waves. Beyond simple sustenance, these middens hold clues to a complex maritime economy. Researchers find evidence of processed seaweed, likely used for food, medicine, or even as a salt source. There are layers of crushed shell, suggesting the mass production of tools or ornaments. Most telling are the trade items, pieces of obsidian whose volcanic glass can be traced to islands hundreds of miles away, or distinctive shells from distant coastlines. These objects did not wash up on the shore, they were brought by intention. This reveals a network, a system of exchange where the cliff settlements were not isolated outposts but connected nodes. They likely traded their surplus fish, salt, or perhaps finely crafted bone tools for resources they lacked, like high-quality stone for their tools or decorative items for ceremony. The sea was their highway, and their vessels were the delivery trucks of the ancient world, moving goods and ideas along coastal routes we can only now begin to map. This evidence fundamentally changes the image of the cliff dwellers. They were not clinging to a barren rock. They were strategically positioned at the center of a rich and reliable resource zone. The cliff was a natural platform overlooking their primary food source and a fortress protecting their accumulated wealth. The difficult access from land was a feature, not a bug. It controlled and protected their economic activity. Their profound mastery of the marine environment provided not just survival, but surplus, and surplus is the foundation of all complex society. It allows for specialization, for artisans, for navigators, for leaders. It fuels trade and fosters connection. The resource hypothesis paints a picture of a vibrant, purposeful culture that looked seaward by choice, building their lives on the frontier because that is where their world was most abundant. Their economy was blue, sustained by the endless, rhythmic bounty of the tide, proving that what looks like the edge of the world to us was, for them, the very heart of it. The ocean gave them everything except the one thing no human can live without. On a salt-drenched cliff, surrounded by the endless, undrinkable sea, the quest for fresh water becomes the ultimate test of a civilization's ingenuity. This is the fourth architectural enigma, a puzzle carved not in grand walls but in the very skin of the rock, the hidden, life-sustaining water catchment systems. At first glance, these features are easy to miss, mere grooves and depressions in the stone, but look closer and you see a masterpiece of hydrological engineering. Across these sites, archaeologists find networks of shallow channels meticulously carved into the sloping bedrock, all leading to a central point. These are not natural erosion patterns, they are designed pathways, a stone-made river system waiting for the rain. The channels funnel every precious drop from a wide area into carved cisterns or natural basins, often lined with layers of carefully selected, impermeable clay to prevent the life-giving water from seeping back into the thirsty ground. This is water harvesting on an industrial scale, a communal solution to a communal problem. But the true brilliance of these systems often lies in their adaptation to a very specific coastal phenomenon, fog. In many of these cliffside environments, especially where cold ocean currents meet warmer air, dense banks of coastal fog roll in regularly. The ancient builders turned this mist into a resource. Some surfaces were carved or positioned to maximize condensation, while other structures, like strategically placed stone mounds or walls, acted as fog fences, causing the tiny water droplets in the fog to coalesce and drip into collection channels. This is not just collecting water, it is literally pulling it from the air, a technology of elegant simplicity that speaks of deep, patient observation of their environment over generations. The presence of such sophisticated and labor-intensive water infrastructure is a definitive clue. It tells us these were not temporary seasonal camps where people could rely on carrying water from distant inland springs. This was permanent, year-round settlement. The investment required to carve these channels and maintain these systems only makes sense if a community plans to stay, to raise children, to build a future in that exact spot. It represents long-term planning, organized communal labor, and a shared commitment to survival. Solving the water puzzle required a profound understanding of local microclimates, of seasonal rain patterns, of how the wind carried the fog, and of which rock types held water best. It is a quiet, humble testament to their intelligence, far removed from the drama of celestial alignments but every bit as vital. In the end, these water systems reveal the most human dimension of the cliff dwellers. The grand walls show us how they defended themselves, the alignments show us how they navigated the cosmos, but the water channels show us how they cared for one another. They show a society that could look at a barren, spray-soaked cliff and see not a wasteland, but a home, a place worth the immense effort of making livable. Every carved groove is a promise to the future, a declaration that they belonged to that wild edge of the world, and they had the wisdom to make it sustain them. The silent stones sometimes speak in pictures, etched into the rock faces adjacent to the cliff ruins, and sometimes on the very walls themselves, is a vast, open-air library of symbols. Spirals that seem to pull the eye inward, concentric circles like ripples from a dropped stone, intricate wave patterns, and clear depictions of boats with tall prows and sea creatures of all kinds. This is not writing in the traditional sense with a fixed alphabet and grammar, but it is undoubtedly a language, a sophisticated system of iconography meant to communicate across generations. To stand before these petroglyphs is to feel the presence of the carver, to see the world filtered through their eyes and translated into permanent lines on stone. The most common motifs are deeply evocative of a maritime life. The spiral, found from the British Isles to Polynesia, is endlessly debated. It could represent the whirlpool, a very real danger to ancient sailors, or the cyclical nature of tides, seasons, and life itself. Concentric circles might map important locations, like a stone chart showing an island surrounded by its reefs, or perhaps signify a ceremonial space. The wave patterns are straightforward yet profound, a homage to the elemental force that shaped their entire existence. And then there are the boats. These are not childish doodles, they are detailed renderings showing vessel types, sometimes with crews indicated by rows of dots, suggesting these images recorded specific voyages or celebrated particular ships and their captains. The global distribution of similar symbols is the key that unlocks a deeper mystery. When you find nearly identical spiral designs on the cliffs of Ireland and on rocks in the American Southwest, or similar stylized whale depictions in coastal Peru and Norway, coincidence becomes an inadequate explanation. These recurring patterns hint at a shared symbolic vocabulary, a visual lingua franca that could be understood by seafarers from different lands. It suggests that ancient mariners encountering these carvings at a distant harbor might have gleaned essential information from them, understanding that a certain symbol indicated a safe freshwater spring, or that a particular arrangement of circles marked a hazardous current. This transforms the petroglyphs from mere art into functional signage, a proto-navigation chart and community bulletin board carved in stone. To decipher this code, researchers borrow from semiotics, the study of signs and symbols. They look for patterns in placement, asking if certain images always face the sea or are clustered near freshwater sources. They analyze composition, seeing if a sequence of symbols tells a miniature story, perhaps of a journey from a point, the home cliff, along a line, the voyage, to a spiral, the destination island. By comparing these motifs across continents, they attempt to reconstruct a lost worldview. A boat carving next to a series of dots might not just be a picture, but a record of a journey that took 20 days. A human figure with arms raised toward a circle above a wave could be a prayer to the sun for a safe crossing. The petroglyphs are the closest we may ever come to reading their thoughts. They are messages left deliberately in the most durable medium available, a testament to a culture that knew their history was too important to be entrusted solely to fragile human memory. They carved their myths, their maps, and their warnings into the living rock of their homes, creating a stone library whose books are open to the sky, waiting for us to learn how to read them. The final chapter of their story may have been written not by human hands but by the climate of the entire planet. The world they knew did not end with a war or a sudden collapse, but with a slow, relentless drowning. As the last great ice age receded, it unleashed a series of catastrophic events known as meltwater pulses, where colossal lakes of glacial meltwater would periodically breach their icy dams and rush into the oceans. These were not gentle, incremental rises. Scientific models suggest that during some of these pulses, global sea levels could have surged by several meters in a single century, or even within a single generation. For a culture whose entire existence was built on the stable, productive coastal plains and sheltered bays of a lower shoreline, this was an existential threat of unimaginable scale. Their most fertile territories, their harbors, their freshwater sources, and the connective pathways between communities would have vanished at a pace far too rapid for any society to adapt. The familiar coastline would have retreated by miles in a lifetime, stranding their settlements and compressing their world onto ever-shrinking strips of land, until only the highest cliffs remained as islands in a rising blue desert. This geographical fragmentation would have had a devastating social impact. A once-connected network of maritime communities, sharing knowledge, resources, and kinship across a vast coastline, would have been violently severed. Isolated on their newly created clifftop islands, groups would have lost contact with one another. The shared cultural knowledge, the intricate navigation routes, the trade networks that sustained their specialized economy, all would have begun to fray and then dissolve. Each group, now alone, would have been forced to adapt in isolation, perhaps developing in wildly different directions, or perhaps simply struggling to survive until their numbers dwindled. The unity suggested by the global pattern of their ruins would have shattered into 1,000 disparate, struggling fragments. Simultaneously, the very engine of their prosperity began to fail. The dramatic influx of cold, fresh meltwater did not just raise sea levels, it fundamentally altered ocean currents and sea surface temperatures. These currents are the conveyor belts of marine life, distributing nutrients and governing water temperature. As they shifted, entire ecosystems would have been thrown into chaos. The predictable migration routes of deep-sea fish like tuna or cod could have changed course or vanished altogether. The rich upwellings that sustained abundant shellfish beds might have stalled. The marine food web they had mastered for millennia suddenly became unpredictable, a once reliable supermarket now with empty shelves. A people who were masters of a stable ocean now faced a volatile, unfamiliar one. This double catastrophe, the loss of their land and the disruption of their food source, would have placed an unbearable strain on even the most resilient society. This perspective transforms their disappearance from a mystery of failure into a tragedy of circumstance. It frames them not as a culture that made a fatal error, but as one overwhelmed by a force of planetary realignment. They were victims of geological time, their destiny tied to the end of an epoch. In this light, those lonely cliff-top ruins take on a profoundly poignant new meaning. They are not the proud capitals of a thriving empire, but the last refuges, the final redoubts. They represent a desperate, stubborn holdout, a community clinging to the highest ground available, watching the world of their ancestors disappear wave by wave, season by season, generation by generation. The very permanence of their stonework, built to last for ages, now stands as a monument to a way of life that was washed away. And here, the stones and the stories finally converge in heartbreaking harmony. The global tapestry of flood myths, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, From the Aboriginal memories of the rising sea to the Celtic legend of Lyoness, may be the preserved emotional echo of this very event. These are not mere allegories, they are the cultural trauma of coastal peoples everywhere, a shared memory of a great drowning passed down for hundreds of generations. The myth of a world lost beneath the waves is likely the literal truth of their experience. Their legacy, then, is twofold: the silent, stubborn stones on the cliffs and the haunting, persistent stories in our oldest legends. Together, they tell the tale of a brilliant maritime culture that flourished in a world now underwater, and of the cataclysm that ultimately separated them from us. The most compelling evidence of their boats is found in their absence. For a culture so clearly defined by the sea, the physical remains of their vessels are almost never found, a ghost fleet lost to the relentless chemistry of saltwater and time. Wood rots, fibers dissolve, and entire maritime technologies can vanish without a trace, leaving behind a boat-shaped void in the archaeological record. Yet this absence is not an emptiness, it is a silhouette, and by studying its edges we can reconstruct the form of what was once there. The first clues are literal pictures. On cliff faces and sheltered stones around the world, the petroglyphs we discussed earlier often depict not simple logs or rafts, but sophisticated, high-prowed vessels with clear structural details. Some carvings show what appear to be planked hulls, with lines indicating separate strakes of wood fastened together, a technology far beyond a dugout canoe. Others show multiple masts or complex rigging. These are not imaginative fantasies, they are technical diagrams left by people who knew every seam and joint of their ships, the ancient equivalent of an engineer's sketch. The second form of proof is geographic logic. Many of these ruins are situated on sheer-sided islands or peninsulas that are completely inaccessible by land, even today. The only conceivable way to reach them, to transport the massive stones and tools needed for construction, and to sustain a community there, was by water. The sites themselves are statements of nautical capability, their very existence a testament to a reliable and substantial maritime transport system. You do not build a permanent city on a remote sea stack unless you possess the boats to make it a hub, not an exile. The third line of evidence is written in stone, quite literally. At numerous coastal sites, the core building material is a type of rock not found locally. Granite blocks appear on limestone coasts, basalt pillars stand on sandstone cliffs. Geological analysis can often trace these stones to quarries many miles away, sometimes on different islands or across significant bodies of open water. The only plausible method for moving multi-ton stones over such distances was by sea, using large, stable, and powerfully built vessels capable of handling such a precarious cargo. This same principle applies to artifacts like the obsidian tools found hundreds of miles from their volcanic source. These objects did not walk, they sailed. Perhaps the most poetic clue is architectural. The design of some structures seems to echo the form of a ship. Long, narrow foundations with curved, upturned ends resemble an inverted boat hull. The use of overlapping, interlocking stonework can mirror the clinker-built technique used in ancient wooden boats, where planks overlap for strength and flexibility. Even the internal layout of some ruins, with a central corridor flanked by smaller chambers, evokes the design of a vessel with a central hold. It is as if the builders, so immersed in the culture of the sea, translated the principles of their most important technology into their homes, creating land ships permanently anchored to the cliffs. Finally, the distribution of culture itself is the ultimate proof of regular sea travel. When you find nearly identical styles of fishhooks, methods of carving, or ceremonial practices on islands separated by open ocean, you are looking at the footprint of a connected society. Culture does not drift across deep water with the currents, it is carried by people. This pattern of shared artifacts across archipelagos implies not accidental, one-way voyages, but a sustained, two-way traffic of ideas, goods, and people. It reveals a maritime highway system, with the cliff settlements acting as lighthouses, ports, and way stations along the route. So while we may never recover the salted timbers of their great canoes or sailing ships, their ghost is indelibly stamped on the world they shaped. The void they left behind is not empty, it is filled with the echoes of lashed rigging, the imagined sound of hulls cutting through swells, and the certainty that from these silent, stony harbors, a once great fleet set out to connect a world we are only beginning to remember. The silence of these ruins is an illusion. Stand within the curved walls of a stone chamber on a cliff in the Orkney Islands, and you do not just see the sea, you hear it in a way that defies ordinary experience. The roar of the waves does not merely surround you, it seems to focus, to gather and resonate deep within your chest, as if the chamber itself is breathing with the tide. This is the fifth architectural enigma, a discovery that adds an entire sensory dimension to the mystery, the intentional shaping of sound. A new field called Archaeoacoustics is revealing that these builders were not just master stoneworkers and celestial observers, they were also acoustic engineers, sculptors of sonic landscapes. They designed their spaces to interact profoundly with the eternal sounds of their world, the wind, the waves, and the deep silence between them. Certain configurations are now understood as deliberate instruments. A narrow entrance passage might act as a sound funnel, capturing the distant crash of surf and directing it inward. A curved, corbelled wall can reflect and amplify specific frequencies, turning the random noise of the wind into a sustained harmonic hum. Strategic openings, like windows aligned with prevailing winds, were not just for light or air, they were wind instruments built into the architecture, creating predictable tones when the breeze reached a certain strength. At sites like Misho in Orkney, experiments have shown that sound behaves in extraordinary ways. A voice spoken softly at one end of a long, stone-lined passage can be heard with crystal clarity at the other, a phenomenon that would have allowed for communication across distances within a ceremonial space without shouting. The placement of standing stones outside can create interference patterns, areas where sounds from the sea are muted or amplified depending on where you stand. This is not accidental. It represents a deep, empirical understanding of how sound waves interact with stone and space, knowledge gained through generations of listening. The potential purposes for this acoustic design are as layered as the sounds themselves. In a ceremonial context, imagine the power of a ritual where the chanting of participants was amplified and blended with the natural drone of the wind, creating an overwhelming sensory experience that connected the community directly to the forces of nature. The space itself became an active participant in the ceremony. For communication, specific frequencies or rhythms drummed near a resonant chamber could carry much farther than a human voice, acting as a sonic beacon or a warning system along the coast. Some researchers even speculate about navigational use. A unique harmonic created by the wind at a particular cliff site, audible from a distance out at sea, could have served as an acoustic landmark, a sound-based lighthouse guiding sailors home through fog or darkness when visual cues failed. This enigma fundamentally changes how we perceive these places. They were not silent monuments to be looked at, they were immersive environments to be felt and heard. The builders integrated the very voice of the ocean into the fabric of their daily and spiritual lives. They understood their world as a symphony of natural forces, and they designed their architecture to be the instrument that played that symphony, harnessing the unpredictable elements of wind and water and turning them into predictable, usable phenomena. It reveals a culture that perceived reality in a more holistic way, where the boundaries between the practical, the spiritual, and the sensory were seamlessly woven together. To stand in one of these spaces is to finally listen to the past, not with your mind but with your whole body, hearing an ancient conversation between human ingenuity and the eternal music of the sea. The story of the cliff dwellers is now being written in a code far older than stone, the language of life itself. Cutting-edge archaeogenetics, the study of ancient DNA, is opening a new window into prehistory, one that traces the movement of people rather than the placement of stones. By analyzing genetic material recovered from ancient resting places in coastal regions across the globe, scientists are mapping a hidden atlas of human migration, revealing journeys that unfolded along the shorelines of the world long before the first written records. These genetic trailblazers left no monuments, but their biological signature is now becoming visible, and it paints a picture of restless movement following the water's edge. The patterns emerging from laboratories are telling a familiar story, one of populations mixing and migrating not through inland mountain passes, but along what researchers poetically term the Kelp Highway, the rich, productive coastal corridors that offered abundant food and a clear, navigable route forward. This genetic detective work is uncovering unexpected connections, revealing that people from vastly different regions met and mingled on these prehistoric coasts, their descendants carrying a blended heritage that challenges simple narratives of isolated tribes. While it remains a profound challenge to directly link a specific strand of ancient DNA to the builders of a specific cliffside ruin, the broader genetic landscape offers a powerful parallel. It suggests that the people who possessed the knowledge to build those enduring structures were not anomalies, but part of a vast, early human diaspora for whom the ocean was a connective lifeline. Their migrations were not desperate flights, but strategic expansions along a known and generous resource path. The genetic evidence shows populations splitting, with one group moving inland while another continued to trace the coastline, their DNA subtly diverging over generations. This hints at a fundamental, ancient choice in how humans settled the planet, a choice between two worlds. Could there be a distinct genetic signature still detectable today, a marker of that early coastal population that viewed the sea as a home rather than a horizon? Researchers are looking for just that, sifting through the complex tapestry of modern and ancient genomes for threads that might indicate a lineage specialized for maritime life. This biological narrative does not replace the archaeological one, it entwines with it. The stones show us where they built, and the genes show us where they came from and who they met along the way. Together, they suggest a profound reality that the first great networks of human culture may have been blue highways, traced in the currents of the ocean and now, faintly, in the very cells of their descendants. It is a reminder that the most enduring ruins are not always made of rock, but are sometimes written silently within us, a living memory of saltwater journeys lost to time. These coastal communities were not just surviving, they were trading. The most compelling evidence for this lies not in the grand architecture, but in the smallest of artifacts, objects that had no business being where they were found. At a cliff settlement in the Mediterranean, archaeologists sifted through the soil and found flakes of obsidian, that volcanic glass prized by ancient peoples for its razor-sharp edges. When analyzed, the chemical signature of that obsidian pointed to a specific volcano on an island over 200 miles away across open water. This was not a piece that washed ashore, it was carried by intention, a commodity that arrived by boat. Hundreds of miles from that same Mediterranean coast, at a site perched above the Atlantic, researchers uncovered fragments of distinctive shell jewelry, bracelets carved with a unique spiral pattern. That exact pattern was later found again on similar bracelets in a settlement on a different sea entirely. The odds of two isolated cultures inventing the same intricate design by chance are vanishingly small. These objects speak of connection, of a shared aesthetic or perhaps a shared meaning that traveled with the people who wore them. Then there is the pottery. At various coastal sites, sherds of pottery are found with nearly identical decorative motifs, waves and spirals and stylized boats. Yet when the clay itself is tested, it is found to be local, sourced from nearby riverbeds. This tells a subtle but profound story. It was not the pots that traveled, but the idea of the pots, the knowledge of how to make them, and the cultural significance of those specific designs was what moved from community to community along the coast. This is the transmission of culture itself, passed hand to hand across the water. These finds dismantle the old image of lonely, self-sufficient fishing villages. Instead, they sketch the outlines of a vast prehistoric maritime exchange system. The cliff settlements, with their panoramic views and defensible positions, were perfectly positioned to function as nodes in this network. They were not endpoints but way stations, a vessel laden with obsidian from Island A, shell beads from Coast B, and perhaps dried fish or salt would approach such a site. From their high perch, lookouts could spot the sail, identify the traders, and prepare for their arrival. The settlement itself provided a safe harbor, a place to negotiate, to rest, and to exchange goods. The community there might offer fresh water, repaired tools, or their own local specialties in return. Crucially, these sites also acted as bridges between the sea and the interior. Inland communities, rich in flint, amber, or perhaps certain plant fibers, would have sought access to the exotic goods and protein of the coast. The cliff settlements, often situated at river mouths or the end of accessible valleys, became the natural gatekeepers and facilitators of this trade. They controlled the flow of goods, knowledge, and people between two different worlds. This transforms the entire narrative. We are no longer looking at scattered points of light in a dark age, but at a connected constellation. Ideas about boat design, celestial navigation, and stone-working techniques could flow along these same routes as the obsidian and the shells. A new fishing technology developed in one bay could spread along the coast within a generation. This circulation of goods and knowledge would have fostered a remarkable cultural and economic unity across vast stretches of the ancient seascape. It suggests a level of social organization and peaceful interaction that we rarely attribute to such deep antiquity. These people were not just masters of their immediate environment, they were participants in a wider world, bound together by the rhythmic pulse of commerce on the tides. Their prosperity was built not only on what they could harvest from the sea below their feet, but on what they could learn from and share with the distant horizon. The sixth enigma is written not in stone but in soil. Beyond the formidable walls and resonant chambers of these coastal sites, another layer of the story lies hidden in the very shape of the land itself, in the subtle, stepped formations that cascade down the cliff faces. These are not natural features, they are terraces painstakingly carved by human hands into the steep slopes, creating narrow, level platforms where the sea wind howls and salt spray constantly falls. For a long time, archaeologists focused on the monumental architecture overlooking these humble earthworks, but soil analysis has now begun to read their secrets, and it reveals a startling fact. On these seemingly barren cliffs, the ancient mariners were not just hunters and fishers, they were also gardeners. Core samples taken from the terraces show a distinct chemical signature, an enrichment and composition different from the surrounding, untamed earth. This is the fingerprint of cultivation. Mixed within this ancient soil, researchers find microscopic traces of pollen and phytoliths, the durable silica skeletons of plants, pointing to species that were not merely gathered but likely tended. These were not the staple grains of inland river valleys. They were specialized, hardy plants evolved to thrive in a punishing coastal microclimate. Species like sea beet, a wild ancestor of chard and beets, or certain grasses with edible seeds, and perhaps medicinal herbs known to coastal peoples for generations. The presence of these terraces transforms our understanding of their economy. It shows a move beyond pure foraging, a step toward managed cultivation even in this marginal environment. This was not full-scale agriculture as we define it, but a sophisticated form of maritime horticulture, a deliberate enhancement of the land's natural yield. The plants grown here would have served vital, specialized purposes. Fibrous plants could have provided material for nets, lines, and clothing, resources as critical as food. Medicinal herbs offered remedies for the ailments of a life at sea, from infections to joint ailments. Supplemental greens and roots would have added crucial vitamins and variety to a diet heavy in protein, bolstering their health and resilience. The sheer labor involved in creating these gardens is a statement in itself. To build a terrace on a cliff requires moving tons of earth and stone, constructing retaining walls to hold the precious soil against erosion from wind and rain. It is a monumental investment of effort for a relatively small return of specialized crops. This investment speaks volumes about their intentions. It demonstrates a commitment to permanence and food security that goes far beyond a seasonal camp. They were not just exploiting this landscape, they were improving it, molding it to serve their long-term needs. They were putting down roots, literally and figuratively, in the most unlikely of places. This discovery beautifully blurs the rigid lines we often draw in human history. These people do not fit neatly into the category of maritime hunter-gatherers, nor are they the classic early agriculturalists sowing vast fields of wheat. They existed in a creative, resilient middle ground, a hybrid economy uniquely adapted to their world. They mastered the deep sea for protein, the coastline for trade, and the very cliff face for specialized cultivation. This triple-stranded subsistence strategy made them incredibly resilient, buffered against the failure of any single resource. The terraces are a quiet, powerful testament to their ingenuity. They prove that for this culture, the cliff was not a barren rock to be endured, but a living, three-dimensional homeland to be shaped and nurtured. Every leveled platform was a declaration of belonging, a patient act of faith in the future, ensuring that even on the edge of the world, life could not only be sustained but could carefully, deliberately grow. The quiet consensus about these ruins shatters the moment you step into the academic arena. Here, the stones are not silent. They are the center of a fierce and fundamental debate, a schism between two ways of seeing the human story. On one side stands mainstream archaeology, a discipline built on meticulous method. Its practitioners urge extreme caution, their guiding principle being that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. When presented with a mysterious cliffside structure, their first instinct is not to leap to a lost civilization, but to ask the hard, slow questions. Could this be a natural geological formation? Might the pottery styles suggest a much later, known culture simply reused an older site? They prioritize rigorous, peer-reviewed dating methods above all, and often, the initial, sensational dates proposed for a site are revised downward after further scrutiny. From this viewpoint, the lack of organic material for carbon dating is not a clue to profound antiquity, but a frustrating gap in the data that cannot be filled by speculation. Their interpretations tend toward the conservative, seeing fishing outposts, fortified storage sites, or ceremonial centers for cultures already within the established historical framework. The goal is not to suppress discovery, but to protect the integrity of the historical record from well-intentioned but premature conclusions that could mislead us for generations. Arrayed against this cautious approach are alternative researchers and independent scholars who see not just ruins but a paradigm-shifting discovery being systematically ignored. They argue that the institutional machinery of academia has a built-in bias, a powerful inertia that protects long-established timelines from disruptive evidence. To them, the consistent global pattern, the advanced engineering, and the stubbornly ancient dates from some methods are too compelling to dismiss as anomaly or coincidence. They point to the difficulty of getting excavation permits for controversial sites, the challenge of securing funding for research that challenges textbooks, and the sometimes dismissive language used in academic journals toward radical theories. This camp views the cliff ruins as the smoking gun of a forgotten epoch, evidence that our linear model of human progress from simple to complex is fundamentally flawed. They believe we are looking at the remnants of a sophisticated, global maritime culture that existed in the deep recesses of our prehistory, a culture whose memory was erased not by time, but by a rising ocean and a rigid academic paradigm. This intellectual conflict is far from a sterile ivory tower dispute. It has real-world consequences that shape what we know. It influences which sites receive grants for extensive excavation and which are left to the elements. It determines whose papers are published in prestigious journals and whose research is relegated to the fringes. Most importantly, it governs public perception, deciding whether these places are presented in museums and documentaries as curious local anomalies or as potential keystones in a rewritten human story. The debate itself, however fraught, is a vital part of the scientific process. It is the necessary friction that tests ideas, demanding that every hypothesis withstand relentless questioning from all angles. For you, the viewer, understanding this divide is crucial. It reveals that history is not a static list of facts in a book, but a dynamic, living conversation. A detective story where the evidence is fragmentary and the interpretations are hotly contested. The story of these coastal ruins is being written not only by trowels and soil samples, but also in conference halls, in peer review comments, and in public forums. Each theory, each contested date, each reinterpretation is a move in a great, slow-motion chess game whose prize is our understanding of who we are and where we came from. To witness this debate is to see knowledge in the making, fought for and won, one contested stone at a time. Carved into the stone of a cliff in Brittany, etched onto a rock face in Chile, and subtly echoed in the foundational layout of a site in Japan, a single, simple shape repeats like a forgotten word on the lips of the ancient world. It is the V, the chevron, a pattern of two lines meeting at a point. In the scattered artistic legacy of these coastal ruins, this is not a casual mark. It is the seventh architectural enigma, a symbolic motif that crosses oceans and cultures with a persistence that demands explanation. Unlike the spiral or the circle, the chevron is direct, directional, almost urgent in its form. It points, it converges, it opens, and in the context of a culture defined by the sea, each of those actions could hold the key to a shared belief. To a people who lived with their eyes on the horizon, the most immediate interpretation is celestial. A V shape opening toward the sky could perfectly capture the form of a migratory bird in flight, like a goose or a pelican. For coastal communities, the arrival and departure of these birds were not just seasonal events. They were vital calendars, signaling changes in weather, fish migrations, and the right time to plant or harvest from their cliffside terraces. The bird was a messenger from the gods, a guide between worlds. To carve its shape was to invoke its power, to seek its guidance for a safe voyage or a bountiful season. But flip that V, point it downward, and its meaning transforms. Now it mirrors the hull of a boat cutting through the water, the wake it leaves behind, or even the shape of a fish. This simple inversion could toggle between the vehicle and the guide, between the means of travel and the signpost for the journey. The symbolism grows richer when you consider the landscape itself. Where a river meets the sea, it often forms a delta, a vast, fertile V of land and water. This confluence is a place of incredible ecological abundance, where freshwater and saltwater mix, attracting life of all kinds. It is also a place of profound transition, a boundary between two states of being. For a maritime people, such a place would be sacred, a literal and spiritual source of life. A chevron could represent this sacred meeting, a symbol of nourishment, transition, and the generative power of boundaries. Alternatively, the V could stand for a mountain, specifically a twin-peaked volcano visible from the sea. Such a landmark would be an unmovable, eternal navigational aid, a fixed point on a fluid world. A carving of that mountain's silhouette would be a permanent map reference, a promise of home or a warning of a distant, fiery shore. The practical mind of a sailor would see something else entirely. On the open water, a V shape is the most basic navigational concept of all, a bearing. It is the angle between your current position and your destination, or the angle between two known landmarks that, when aligned, guides you safely into a hidden harbor entrance. A chevron carved at the head of a narrow inlet could literally point the way, its apex indicating the only safe channel through treacherous rocks. In this light, the symbol ceases to be merely decorative and becomes functional, a stone signpost for anyone who understood the code. It could also represent a clan symbol, a totem for a specific family or group of mariners. Finding the same distinctive style of chevron at sites across a region could trace the trade routes or kinship networks of a particular seafaring lineage. The true power of this enigma lies in its beautiful ambiguity. It is likely that the chevron held not one meaning, but a constellation of related meanings, all orbiting the core experiences of a maritime life: direction, transition, convergence, and sacred landmarks. This multiplex symbolism is the hallmark of a sophisticated visual language. It allowed a single, efficiently carved shape to convey a dense packet of information, a story, a warning, a prayer, or a map, understandable to any initiated traveler along the coast. Its global recurrence suggests that this symbolic vocabulary was not invented independently dozens of times, but was part of a shared system of meaning that flowed along those ancient blue highways. To decode this one persistent shape is to catch a fleeting glimpse of how these people saw their universe, not as a chaotic expanse, but as a patterned, meaningful landscape where every bird's flight, every river's mouth, and every mountain's peak was a sign waiting to be read. This simple chevron, pointing skyward or down to the sea, quietly challenges the very foundations of our history. For centuries, the story of civilization's dawn has been anchored firmly in a specific landscape, the fertile river valley. We are taught that complexity was born when humans first settled along the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, and the Yellow River, mastering the seasonal floods to cultivate grain. This narrative places agriculture at the absolute center, suggesting that only the surplus provided by farming could fuel specialization, hierarchy, and monumental building. It is a powerful and logical story, one that has shaped our understanding of progress itself. But what if it is not the whole story? The existence of a sophisticated, ancient maritime culture, thriving on cliffs and coastlines thousands of years before the Great Pyramids were even a dream, does not merely add a footnote to this tale. It demands we write an entirely new introduction. Imagine the traditional narrative as a book titled The Rise of Civilization. Its first chapter is always the same, the river. But the evidence of these coastal ruins suggests we need a second, parallel first chapter, one we have long ignored. We could call it the sea. This chapter tells of a different pathway to societal complexity, one not fueled by domesticated wheat and barley, but by the predictable, abundant harvest of the ocean. Its surplus came not from tilled fields, but from rich fisheries, from trade networks spanning archipelagos, and from the specialized knowledge needed to navigate a trackless blue world. In this narrative, civilization's cradle is not a singular point on a map, but a vast, interconnected coastline. The ocean itself becomes the formative force, shaping social organization around exploration, long-distance communication, and collective defense against the elements. This shift is more than academic. It re-centers the human story in a profound way. It challenges deeply ingrained land-centric models that have often carried a subtle Eurocentric bias, focusing on the Middle East as a singular point of origin from which all else radiated. A validated maritime origin presents a more diverse, decentralized, and adventurous beginning. It suggests that the spark of complex society could ignite independently in multiple places, wherever humans formed a deep, symbiotic relationship with their environment, whether that environment was a river's floodplain or the interface of cliff and open sea. The builders of these coastal sites were not waiting for agriculture to be invented. They were building observatories, terraces, and trade networks using a different kind of wealth, one measured in knowledge of currents, stars, and stone. Ultimately, this reframing liberates our imagination about the past. It allows for multiple cradles, each rocking a different kind of human ingenuity. Perhaps the first architects were not farmers who learned to build granaries, but sailors who needed permanent, storm-proof harbors and celestial markers. Perhaps the first long-distance traders paddled canoes loaded with obsidian and shells, not donkey caravans bearing spices. This does not diminish the achievements of river valley cultures. It simply places them alongside another, equally brilliant tradition. It paints a picture of a more creatively diverse ancient world, where human potential flowered in many forms, driven by the unique challenges and opportunities of the landscape they called home. The silent stones on the cliffs ask us to consider that the true cradle of civilization may not have been a valley at all, but the meeting place of land and the endless, beckoning sea. The silent stones are no longer speaking only to the patient archaeologist with a trowel. Today, they are being interrogated by eyes that see through forest, water, and earth itself. This modern investigation is powered by a suite of technologies that act as a form of digital time travel, revealing the lost world in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. The first of these revolutionary tools is airborne LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine an aircraft flying over a dense, jungle-covered coastal hillside, a place where ground surveys are nearly impossible. It sends down millions of laser pulses every second. Most hit the leaves and branches of the canopy, but a fraction slip through, striking the ground below and bouncing back. By stripping away the digital forest, researchers are left with a breathtakingly precise three-dimensional map of the bare earth, and on those maps, the geometric ghosts of the past emerge. What looked like a natural, vegetated slope is revealed to be a series of perfectly level terraces, the faint but unmistakable grid of foundations, or the long, straight lines of a processional road leading to the cliff's edge. LiDAR is pulling back the green curtain, showing us that these ruins are not just on the exposed cliffs we can see, but hidden inland along forgotten coastal plains now reclaimed by wilderness. Beneath the waves, another technology is mapping a drowned geography. Multi-beam sonar is the LiDAR of the deep. Towed behind research vessels, it emits fan-shaped swaths of sound waves that paint the seafloor in astonishing detail. This is not the blurry, low-resolution sonar of the past. It can reveal the texture of sand, the outline of a submerged river channel, and the stark, angular shapes that nature rarely creates. With this tool, scientists are systematically scanning the continental shelves, those vast, shallow plains that were dry land during the last ice age. They are finding not just scattered artifacts, but the very topography of the ancient world. The sunken hills that were once islands, the valleys that were once riverbeds leading to lost estuaries, and most tantalizingly, regular geometric patterns and mounds that stand out starkly against the natural seabed. These sonar maps are the blueprints for a vanished landscape, allowing us to visualize where the coastal people likely lived, fished, and built before the ocean took it all back. From even higher above, the gaze of satellites adds another layer of understanding. Advanced spectral imaging from space can detect subtle differences in soil moisture, mineral composition, and plant health that are invisible to the human eye. A stone wall buried for millennia will affect how water drains and how nutrients are distributed in the soil above it. This, in turn, affects the vegetation. Crops growing over a buried foundation may be stunted or have a different chlorophyll signature than those growing in undisturbed earth. By analyzing these anomalies, researchers can identify promising sites for ground investigation across entire regions, turning a search that once relied on luck and local lore into a targeted scientific survey. This trio of technologies, LiDAR, sonar, and satellite imagery, fundamentally changes the pace and scope of discovery. It allows for non-invasive, large-scale reconnaissance. Researchers can now survey hundreds of square miles of impenetrable jungle or vast stretches of seabed in the time it once took to meticulously excavate a single room. This is the engine of the modern revolution in our understanding. It is turning poetic speculation about a lost maritime world into hard, mappable, measurable data. Each new scan, each new digital map, is like finding a new page of a manuscript we thought was destroyed, bringing us closer than ever to confirming not just the existence of these people, but the breathtaking scale and sophistication of the civilization they built where the land meets the sea. The eighth enigma is defined not by what is present, but by what is strikingly absent. Walk among the soaring walls and resonant chambers of these coastal ruins, and you will search in vain for the grand, ornate tombs that define so many other ancient civilizations. There are no pyramids piercing the sky, no vast burial mounds, no treasure-filled chambers carved for kings. This void is a profound statement in itself. In a world where power was so often cemented in death, displayed for eternity in stone, this culture chose a different path. Their most monumental works were built not for the afterlife, but for the living community and the endless, rhythmic present of the sea. This absence forces a radical rethinking of their social fabric. It hints at a society that may have been far more egalitarian, where leadership was based on knowledge, navigational skill, or communal service rather than hereditary wealth hoarded and then entombed. Status was not frozen in a mortuary temple, but was fluid and demonstrated through action, through the ability to guide a vessel through a storm, to interpret the stars, or to organize the building of a terrace that would feed the community for generations. Their legacy was invested in the here and now, in structures that sustained life rather than commemorated its end. This does not mean they did not honor their departed. Their practices simply aligned with their worldview, one intimately tied to the ocean. Burial at sea is a timeless maritime tradition, a return to the elemental force that gave them life. Committing a loved one to the depths, perhaps weighted with stones and sent to rest among the currents they once sailed, would have been a sacred and logical farewell. Other resting places may have been chosen in coastal caves, natural vaults that have since collapsed from millennia of erosion, or on low-lying islands and peninsulas that were gradually consumed by the rising post-glacial seas. Their most sacred memorial sites could now lie silent and unseen, just offshore beneath the waves, making their death rituals as elusive to us as their drowned villages. The very landscape they trusted with their lives may have also been their final resting place, now permanently merged with the marine world they revered. This fundamental choice, to build for life, not for death, challenges our deepest definitions of civilization. We are conditioned to measure ancient greatness by the scale of its tombs, by the gold and grandeur sealed away for eternity. But here was a culture that poured its collective effort, its finest engineering, and its artistic expression into lighthouses, lookout towers, water catchment systems, and communal gathering spaces. Their wealth was expressed in a different currency, the seaworthiness of their vessels, the accuracy of their celestial calendars etched into cliff sides, and the shared knowledge that allowed them to thrive on the edge of the world. Their monuments were functional, designed to interact with the living elements of wind, water, and light. a resonant chamber that amplified the ocean's roar, was a far more meaningful temple than a sealed sepulchre. A solstice alignment that marked the turning of the seasons for fishermen was a more vital testament to their understanding than a statue of a ruler. In the end, this silent enigma of missing tombs asks us to listen more carefully to what the ruins are actually saying. This was a civilization whose identity was not rooted in the fear of death or the glorification of individual power, but in a dynamic, ongoing relationship with a vast and living ocean. Their architecture was a dialogue with the present moment, an endless project of adaptation and harmony. They built not to defy time from within a tomb, but to flow with time from atop a cliff, leaving behind a legacy written not in burial goods, but in the enduring shape of the land against the sea, and in the quiet, persistent mystery of why they chose to leave no royal bones behind. Perhaps this mystery endures not because of the stones, but because of the sea itself. We are drawn to these ruins for reasons deeper than archaeology, reasons that speak to something ancient within us. The ocean is our planet's final frontier, a vast, dark, and silent realm that still resists our full understanding. It represents the ultimate unknown, and by extension, it holds the promise of ultimate secrets. The idea that an entire chapter of the human story could be hidden beneath its waves or written on its forgotten shores taps into a primal mix of wonder and dread. It confronts us with the possibility of oblivion, that even the most ingenious cultures can be erased, their names washed away, leaving only cryptic monuments as their epitaphs. This is not a morbid fascination, but a humbling one. It challenges the very core of our anthropocentric timeline, the comforting narrative that we are the pinnacle of a linear, recorded ascent. These cliffs whisper of a past far longer and more complex, a past where humanity's first great triumphs may have been measured in nautical miles, not in written chronicles. There is a profound romance to this idea, a longing for a time when our connection to the natural world was not just practical, but sacred. We imagine a people who read the stars not as distant balls of gas, but as ancestors and guides who heard the voice of the wind in the stones of their homes and who saw the ocean not as a barrier but as a home. In a modern world of digital grids and fragmented communities, the vision of a society built on collective mastery of a wild element feels like a purer, more integrated way of being. It speaks to a deep-seated human yearning for purpose derived from direct engagement with the elemental forces of our planet. But beyond romance, there is the irresistible allure of the puzzle. This is a detective story written on a continental scale with clues scattered across the globe. It invites every one of us to participate. When you look at a photograph of a strange stone alignment on a distant coast, you are not just a passive viewer, you are being asked to weigh the evidence. Could that be natural? What purpose could it have served? Your mind begins to connect dots, to imagine the hands that shaped it and the eyes that looked out from it. This active engagement is what transforms history from a dry list of facts into a living, breathing mystery. We become collaborators in the search, our own curiosity fueling the collective effort to piece together a lost world. Ultimately, the silent stones on the cliffs captivate us because they reflect our own deepest questions. They ask us who we are by showing us who we might have been. They remind us that the human spirit has always been drawn to the horizon, and that our greatest stories may not be the ones we have kept, but the ones the sea has kept for us, waiting in the patient dark for the right moment to return to the light. The very forces that preserved these ruins for millennia are now turning against them. The same relentless ocean that hid their lower settlements is rising once more, this time not from melting glaciers but from a warming climate. The result is an accelerating crisis of coastal erosion, where storm surges of increasing power claw at foundations that have stood for 10,000 years. A wall that withstood centuries of gales can now be undermined and toppled in a single violent season. the patient work of ancient engineers undone by the changing weather patterns of our modern world. This is not a distant threat, it is a countdown measured in years, not centuries. Archaeologists now speak of a triage, a desperate race to document what remains before the sea claims it forever. They use three-dimensional laser scanning to create perfect digital twins of fragile structures, knowing the virtual model may soon be the only record left. Every scan, every photograph is an act of rescue, pulling a piece of the past into the digital present before the physical evidence is gone. But the sea is not the only enemy. The isolation that once protected these sites now makes them vulnerable. Looters, seeking artifacts for the illegal antiquities market, can quietly strip a location of its movable history, destroying the context that gives each object its meaning. A carved stone removed from its niche is just a curiosity, its story of who placed it there and why is lost the moment it is taken. This theft is a double erasure, robbing both the physical site and our collective understanding of it. Similarly, the growing fascination with these mysteries brings another danger: irresponsible tourism. While respectful visitors can be powerful allies, unchecked foot traffic can wear away ancient pathways, and the simple act of touching a carved surface transfers oils that accelerate erosion. A site that survived intact for ages can be loved to death in a single generation without proper stewardship and careful guidance. Perhaps the most direct threat comes from the modern world's hunger for space and resources. Coastal development for resorts, ports, or aquaculture can level a terraced hillside in a matter of days. Quarrying operations seeking raw materials may see an ancient, interlocking wall not as a monument, but as a convenient source of pre-cut stone. The conflict is stark, a clash between the value of the ancient past and the pressures of the present. In this race, the work of conservation archaeologists has become a form of frontline activism. They are no longer just interpreters of the past, they are its defenders, partnering with local communities who often hold the deepest stake in these places. For these communities, the ruins are not just archaeological sites, they are part of their ancestral landscape, woven into local identity and sometimes spiritual tradition. This partnership is vital, merging scientific methodology with indigenous knowledge and a profound, long-term commitment to place. The mission has shifted from pure discovery to urgent salvage. It is a field where history, climate science, and community advocacy converge. Every successful intervention, whether it is a seawall built to deflect waves, a management plan to guide sustainable tourism, or a legal designation that protects a site from development, is a small victory in a larger war against time. This work redefines what it means to study the past. It is no longer a passive observation of what was, but an active struggle to ensure that a fragile, irreplaceable record of human ingenuity survives into the future. The silent stones on the cliffs have endured ice ages and rising seas, but their greatest test may be the century we are now living in. Their survival, and the survival of the stories they hold, depends on a choice we are making right now, a choice about what we value and what legacy we are willing to fight for. A stone doorway on a cliff does not always frame the open sea. In a handful of these enigmatic sites, the view is more specific, a narrow portal that aligns perfectly with a submerged feature invisible from the shore. This is the 9th architectural enigma, a subtle clue that the builders' perception of their world did not stop at the water's edge. Their territory was not defined by the coastline, but included the hidden geography beneath the waves, a submarine landscape they understood with startling intimacy. Modern bathymetric maps, which chart the shape of the seafloor, are now revealing these silent correlations. A processional path leading down to the water might end at a point directly above a deep underwater sinkhole, a blue hole teeming with marine life. A ceremonial platform could be oriented toward a specific underwater ridge, a linear feature that guides migratory fish like an underwater highway. The most vital alignments point to submerged freshwater springs, places where drinkable water bubbles up through the seabed, a phenomenon known as a submarine karst spring. These springs would have been oases of life, attracting fish and providing a crucial, hidden source of fresh water accessible by boat or perhaps at the lowest tides. The precision of these alignments dismantles our modern, two-dimensional map. It shows that for these people, the coast was not a line but a fluid, three-dimensional zone. Their mental map was holistic, integrating the visible cliff, the tidal zone, and the concealed seafloor into a single, functional territory. They did not see the ocean as a flat, featureless plain, but as a varied landscape of hills, valleys, and springs, each with its own purpose and meaning. An alignment with an underwater ridge was not arbitrary. Such ridges often create upwellings where nutrient-rich cold water rises to the surface, creating incredibly rich fishing grounds. By marking these spots from their cliff-top vantage, the builders created a permanent reference, a way to direct fishing crews to the most productive spots with a simple gesture. It turned a hidden underwater feature into a managed communal resource. Similarly, an alignment with a freshwater spring offshore was a matter of survival strategy. In a place where fresh water on land was scarce and painstakingly collected from carved channels, a spring bubbling from the seafloor represented a secondary, perhaps secret, reservoir. Knowledge of its location, marked by a stone on the cliff, would have been invaluable, especially during dry seasons or if their terrestrial systems were compromised. This practice reveals a profound adaptability, an ability to source life's necessities from the most unexpected places. The most speculative yet compelling interpretation is that these alignments marked sacred sites. In many island cultures, specific places in the ocean are considered the homes of deities or the gateways to the underworld. A deep, dark sinkhole or a mysterious spring in the sea could easily be viewed as a portal to another realm. Aligning a temple doorway or a ceremonial stone with such a feature would physically and spiritually connect the community to that powerful, unseen world. It would make the invisible visible, anchoring their cosmology to a tangible point in the seascape. This enigma ultimately erases the line we so firmly draw between land and sea. It portrays a culture that lived in a seamless continuum with the ocean. Their architecture was not just about dominating the cliff, but about conversing with the entire coastal system. They built markers that acknowledged and utilized the full depth of their environment, from the highest stone to the spring on the seafloor. In doing so, they left behind a final, profound lesson. To truly understand a maritime people, you must look not only at where they stood, but at what they were looking at, and remember that their world extended far beneath the shimmering surface. The final proof of this ancient maritime world does not come from a laboratory but from the open ocean. When theories meet the relentless test of wind and wave, a different kind of truth emerges, one written in salt spray and blistered hands. This is the realm of the experimental archaeologist, a modern pioneer who asks not just what was possible, but what it actually felt like. Their method is radical in its simplicity. Build the ancient boat using the ancient tools, then sail the ancient route. They trade trowels for adzes and journals for sails, transforming abstract hypotheses into tangible, physical experience. Projects like the famous Kon-Tiki expedition demonstrated a profound principle. In 1947, Thor Heyerdahl and his crew built a balsa wood raft using only materials and techniques available in pre-Columbian South America, then drifted and sailed it 4,300 miles across the Pacific to prove such a journey was feasible. While his specific theory about Polynesian origins is contested, the voyage itself was a monumental revelation. It shattered the entrenched belief that ancient peoples were prisoners of their coastlines, terrified of the deep blue. It proved that even a simple raft, guided by observation and courage, could cross an ocean. but the true revolution in understanding came from projects like the Horticulture, a full-scale replica of a traditional Polynesian double-hulled voyaging canoe. Built in the 1970s, it was not just a museum piece, it was a vessel meant to sail, navigating without instruments, using only the stars, the swell of the waves, the flight of birds, and generations of reawakened oral knowledge. The Horticulture successfully sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti and back. This was not a stunt, it was a cultural resurrection. It proved that the long-distance settlement of the Pacific was not a series of accidental drifts, but a deliberate, skillful, and repeatable act of exploration. The Horticulture and the cultural revival it sparked showed that the technology was not merely the canoe, but the vast, teachable curriculum of knowledge carried in the minds of its navigators. These modern voyages provide insights no soil sample or satellite image ever could. They reveal the grueling, intimate reality of prehistoric travel. Experimental archaeologists learn how long it truly takes to shape a log with stone tools, feeling the difference between wood types. They discover how a vessel handles in a sudden squall, understanding why a certain hull shape was perfected over generations. They experience the physical toll of bailing water for hours, the mental focus required to hold a course by a single star obscured by clouds, and the profound reliance on a crew working as a single unit. This lived experience answers practical questions that ruins leave silent. How much fresh water could you realistically store? How did you sleep on a rocking deck? How did you keep a sense of direction when the horizon was a featureless circle for weeks on end? Each successful voyage, each replicated technique, builds an undeniable body of evidence. It closes the gap between the silent, static ruin on the cliff and the dynamic, living culture it supported. We move from wondering if they could sail to understanding how they sailed. We learn that their greatest invention was not the boat itself, but the accumulated, communal intelligence of how to use it, a deep ocean literacy written in the language of wind patterns, bird behavior, and star paths. The experimental archaeologist does not just study history, they momentarily step into its current, feeling the pull of the same tides that guided the ancients, and in that struggle, they hear the faintest echo of a mastery we are only beginning to comprehend. The most profound evidence of their existence may not be buried in the ground, but alive in the hands of a fisherman mending his net, or in the song of a navigator steering by the stars. While the great stone citadels fell silent, the knowledge that built them did not simply vanish. Instead, it flowed like a slow current into the cultural DNA of the coastal peoples who came after, creating a living bridge across thousands of years. From the remote islands of the South Pacific to the rugged fjords of Scandinavia, there are communities whose daily lives are a direct, unbroken conversation with the same ocean that shaped their ancient predecessors. Their traditions are not mere replicas but evolved continuations, the living remnants of that foundational maritime consciousness. Consider the most fundamental tool, the boat. In parts of Polynesia, the design principles of the double-hulled voyaging canoe, with its lashed construction and flexible hull, are a direct inheritance from the master navigators of the deep past, principles now celebrated in vessels like the Horticulture. Along the coasts of India and Sri Lanka, traditional catamarans built without a single nail, their planks stitched together with coconut rope, employ a shock-absorbing, ocean-going technology that is millennia old. These are not archaic holdovers but proven, elegant solutions to the eternal challenge of the sea, solutions that were likely perfected by that earlier, forgotten culture and passed down through countless generations of shipwrights who saw no need to fix what the ocean itself had not broken. The same continuity echoes in fishing techniques. The use of stone tidal traps, intricate weirs built to harness the rhythm of the tides, can be found from the coasts of Scotland to the shores of Korea. The knowledge of which moon phase brings which species, or how to read the water's color to find subsurface currents, is not written in any manual. it is carried in the oral lore of fishing families. This is a cumulative, generational science, a body of knowledge that began with the first people who learned to predict the ocean's patterns from a cliff-top home. Perhaps the most striking inheritance is in the art of wayfinding, the non-instrument navigation that guided humans across the planet's greatest expanse. The star compass of the Polynesian navigators, the understanding of swell patterns and bird flight paths, represents a sophisticated cognitive map of the Pacific. This is not a system that can be invented in a single lifetime. It is the refined product of thousands of years of observation and daring, a curriculum of the sea that could have its deepest roots in the celestial alignments carved into ancient cliff faces. Even language carries whispers of this blue heritage. Linguists note that certain root words for sea, wave, boat, and fish appear in surprisingly similar forms across widely dispersed language families that fringe the ocean, suggesting a very ancient, shared vocabulary born of a shared, maritime-centered life. In isolated coastal communities, stories are not just entertainment, they are vital data storage. Chants that list dozens of ancestral chiefs in precise order also preserve migration routes. Myths about great floods and lost lands are not mere allegory, but could be the preserved memory of the very post-glacial sea level rise that reshaped their world. These narratives are the soft, resilient counterpart to the hard evidence of stone, a living library that has kept the past present through the power of spoken word and ritual. This perspective transforms the entire mystery. The story is no longer one of a culture that disappeared without a trace, leaving only enigmatic ruins. It becomes a story of incredible resilience and adaptation. As the great coastal civilization fragmented under the pressure of rising seas, its people did not vanish, they dispersed. They carried their core knowledge with them, blending with new groups, adapting to new shores, but always retaining the essential toolkit of a maritime life. Their legacy was not in a fallen empire, but in a dispersed and enduring skill set that became the bedrock for countless later coastal societies around the globe. The descendants of the cliff builders are likely among us, not as a lost tribe waiting to be found, but as the inheritors of a way of seeing the world. They are the communities for whom the sea is not a resource to be exploited, but a relative to be understood, a compass for living. Their continued existence is the most powerful argument that this ancient culture did not fail. It transformed, its spirit surviving not in silent stone, but in the salt-roughened hands and horizon-seeking eyes of those who still find their direction in the deep, blue rhythms of the tide. A single towering ruin on a cliff is never truly alone. Scattered across the surrounding headlands, nestled in sheltered coves just out of sight, and perched on lower sea stacks are the echoes of daily life, a constellation of smaller, simpler structures. This is the 10th architectural enigma, the pattern of micro-settlements and satellite sites that orbit the main complexes. These are not grand monuments, but the practical, humble footprints of a working community, and they tell a story of social organization as clearly as any palace. You find stone circles just large enough for a family, low walls forming windbreaks, and simple platforms overlooking specific fishing grounds. Some were clearly seasonal, used during the salmon run or the seal migration, their temporary nature written in their less permanent construction. Others, like a solitary hut on a promontory with a commanding view of the northern horizon, could only have been a lookout post, a lonely vigil kept for returning boats or approaching weather. Then there are the task-specific sites, clearings with smooth stones perfect for repairing nets or processing a large catch, situated close to fresh water but away from the main living area to manage smells and waste. This distribution is not random, it is a masterclass in social geography. The presence of these varied sites reveals a community with clear social stratification and a sophisticated division of labor. Not everyone lived in the imposing stone citadel on the highest point. That central hub was likely home to the leaders, the master navigators, the priests who read the stars, and the families who guarded the community's most vital knowledge and resources. The smaller satellite sites, by contrast, suggest the homes of fishers, artisans, and gatherers, those whose work required them to be closer to specific resources or who held a different status within the social order. This hierarchical pattern indicates a society that was not simply a band of equals, but one with roles, responsibilities, and likely a chain of command essential for coordinating large-scale endeavors like building a terrace or launching a deep-sea fishing expedition. Mapping these microsites is like revealing the functional anatomy of the entire community. Each small structure is an organ with a specific purpose, and together they form a living, breathing organism perfectly adapted to its coastal environment. The main cliff complex is the heart and brain, the central command. The seasonal fishing camp in the next bay is the stomach, processing nourishment. The lookout posts are the eyes, scanning the horizon. The net-mending shelters are the hands, maintaining the tools of survival. This network allowed them to exploit every ecological niche their territory offered, from the deep water cliffs to the sandy coves to the tidal estuaries, with ruthless efficiency. A resource was never too far away, and a task always had a designated place. This transforms our understanding from a singular mystery to a networked reality. A lone ruin is not a mystery in isolation. It is the central hub of a community whose footprint is written across miles of coastline. It was a hub with spokes, each leading to a specialized function that sustained the whole. This complex social geography shows a people who did not just inhabit a cliff, they managed a coastal territory. They understood that to thrive on the edge, they had to organize, to specialize, and to distribute their population across the landscape in a way that turned a challenging environment into a diversified, resilient homeland. The grand stones asked who they were, but these small, quiet foundations show us how they lived day by day, season by season, in a delicate and brilliant balance with the sea. The investigation is no longer confined to the shoreline. The future of this search is plunging into the deep, where the most promising evidence has been waiting in darkness for 12,000 years. Our next frontier is not a distant cliff, but the vast, submerged plains of the continental shelves, the very lands where this maritime culture once built their homes before the sea took them back. This is the realm of deep-sea archaeology, a field on the cusp of a revolution. In the coming decade, we will not be sending divers to curious anomalies. We will be deploying fleets of autonomous robotic submersibles, equipped with high-resolution sonar and lasers, to systematically map these drowned landscapes. They will not just look for structures, they will scan for the subtle topography of human habitation, the sunken riverbeds that were their highways, the submerged hills that were their islands, and the gentle depressions that might mark the foundations of a village now buried under layers of sediment. This is a shift from searching for needles in a haystack to digitally reconstructing the entire haystack as it existed before the flood. Alongside this robotic exploration, a microscopic revolution is unfolding in the laboratory. Scientists are now pioneering the extraction of ancient environmental DNA, or cetDNA, from core samples taken from the seabed near these ruins. This technique does not look for human bones, but for the genetic echoes of the entire ecosystem they lived within. By analyzing the preserved DNA of ancient plankton, seaweed, fish, and even the pollen from coastal plants trapped in layered mud, researchers can reconstruct a detailed picture of the water temperature, salinity, and bounty that surrounded a site millennia ago. It allows us to ask not just when they lived there, but what their world smelled like, tasted like, and how rich it truly was. We could discover that a now barren cliff was once fronted by a thriving oyster reef, or that a stretch of open sea was a seasonal migration corridor for whales, explaining the very reason for a settlement's location. Every artifact tells two stories: what it is and where it came from. The future lies in advanced geochemical sourcing, where lasers are used to vaporize a microscopic speck of an obsidian tool or a pottery shard, analyzing its unique elemental fingerprint. This science can now trace a piece of stone not just to a general region, but to a specific quarry, even a particular outcrop. By mapping these connections, we will no longer see isolated sites, but a dynamic web of trade and travel. A single tool found on a cliff in Scotland could be chemically linked to a volcano in Iceland, charting a voyage across the North Atlantic that rewrites our maps of prehistoric contact. This turns scattered objects into data points in a vast, ancient network. Perhaps the most significant development is not a tool, but a collaboration. International teams of archaeologists, oceanographers, geneticists, and climate scientists are now forming consortia with a shared goal: to build a unified, global database of coastal prehistoric sites. Imagine a digital atlas where you can overlay a map of underwater terrain from sonar data, with a layer showing ancient sea level curves, another layer plotting the geochemical sources of found artifacts, and a final layer showing the DNA evidence for past marine productivity. This synthesis is the key. The mystery is too big for any one discipline. It requires the climate scientist to explain why the sea rose, the geneticist to trace the movement of people, the oceanographer to model the ancient currents they sailed, and the archaeologist to interpret what they built. Only by weaving these threads together can we hope to see the full tapestry. This collaborative, data-rich future marks a profound shift. The question of a lost maritime culture is moving from the fringes of speculation toward the very center of rigorous, interdisciplinary science. What was once the domain of alternative history is becoming a priority for mainstream research institutions, funded by governments and explored with the most advanced technology on Earth. The promise is no longer just a few more mysterious stones, but a comprehensive digital model of a lost world, a paleoscape we can virtually walk through, understanding not only the architecture they left behind, but the vibrant, interconnected civilization that once thrived there. The next revelation may not come from a single dramatic find, but from the quiet hum of a server correlating a million points of data, finally revealing the shape of a past we are only beginning to remember. All these scattered clues, from the echoing stones to the silent genes, are not random pieces of a broken pot. They are the distinct, colored threads of a single, magnificent tapestry, waiting to be woven back together into a picture of a world we have forgotten. Let us step back from the microscope and the sonar screen and attempt that delicate act of synthesis to see what coherent story emerges when we braid architecture, climate, geography, and memory into one plausible narrative. This is not about declaring a final, proven truth, but about constructing a working model, a story built on evidence that dares to imagine the whole, providing a satisfying interim portrait of a lost golden age of the sea. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a great melting. As the last ice sheets retreated, they unlocked a new planet, one with coastlines that stretched for thousands of miles where none had existed before. Into this dynamic, watery frontier moved a people. They were not the first humans on the shore, but they were the first to truly see its potential, not as a temporary camp, but as a permanent home. They watched the land rebound from the weight of the ice and the seas slowly climb, and they chose to build not inland, but at the very interface of earth and ocean, in places of strategic abundance and defensive strength. With a deep, generational understanding of their environment, they became masters of a new material, stone, and a new medium, the sea. Their society was born from the logic of the coast. They developed boats not as simple rafts, but as sophisticated, ocean-going vessels, their designs refined over centuries into elegant solutions for crossing open water. These vessels became the capillaries of their civilization, connecting a far-flung network of communities. Each settlement, from the towering citadel on a stormy headland to the smaller fishing village in a sheltered cove, was a node in this vast blue web. They were not isolated tribes, but kin connected by trade, by marriage, by shared knowledge, and by the silent language of symbols carved into rock. Obsidian from a distant volcano, shells from a warm southern sea, and stories from over the horizon flowed along these routes, binding them into a loose but recognizable cultural sphere that may have spanned continents. Their lives were a continuous dialogue with the elements. They built not just shelters but instruments, shaping stone to capture the sound of the wind and the wave, to mark the precise moment the sun returned after the solstice, and to funnel precious rainwater into cisterns. They read the ocean like a book, understanding that a certain bird's flight meant land was near, that a specific swell pattern indicated a hidden current, and that the color of the water revealed the bounty below. Their spirituality was woven from this same fabric, seeing the sacred in the meeting of sea and sky, venerating the celestial guides that made their voyages possible, and perhaps believing their ancestors resided in the depths from which all life emerged. This was a culture of profound integration, where the practical and the spiritual, the individual and the community, were inseparable strands of the same rope. For thousands of years, this maritime civilization flourished, its people the undisputed lords of the post-glacial coastline. They developed a hybrid economy, drawing protein from the deep sea, cultivating specialized plants on terraced cliffs, and trading goods across vast distances. Their monuments were not tombs, but testaments to living knowledge, observatories and gathering places that celebrated their connection to the cosmos and to each other. It was by any measure a golden age, a long period of stability, innovation and exploration conducted from the edge of the world. Then the world changed again. The climate, having granted them their domain, began to reclaim it. The meltwater pulses were not a gentle tide, but a series of devastating surges that redrew the map within human lifetimes. The coastal plains that held their farms, the sheltered bays that harbored their fleets, the very connections between communities, were swallowed by the rising blue. They were forced into a long, desperate retreat, generation after generation pulling back to higher ground, watching their world drown, the network shattered into isolated fragments. The shared knowledge of star paths and trade routes faded into local legend. The grand, interconnected civilization compressed, adapted, and transformed. Some groups moved inland, blending their maritime skills with new ways of life. Others held on in their now isolated cliff-top redoubts, their descendants becoming the coastal peoples we know from history, carrying forward echoes of the old ways in their boat designs, their fishing lore, and their flood myths. The great synthesis is this: we are not looking for a people who vanished. We are looking for a people who transformed, whose legacy was not erased, but dispersed like seeds on the current. The stones on the cliffs are their stubborn, surviving bones. The myths of great floods are the cultural memory of their trauma. The shared symbols across oceans are the faded ink of their once common language. And the enduring maritime traditions found in isolated communities around the globe are the living breath of their knowledge, passed hand to hand across hundreds of generations. This story is a framework, a scaffold built on the evidence we have, acknowledging the vast gaps that remain. It may shift with each new discovery from the seabed or the genetics lab. But it allows us to finally see the fragments not as isolated curiosities, but as parts of a grand, lost narrative, a chapter in the human story where the first great age of exploration and connection was not achieved on land, but was written in saltwater and stone by a people who looked to the horizon and saw not an end but a beginning. These silent stones on the cliff edge are not just ruins, they are a question. For every answer we have found, from the celestial alignments to the submerged springs, a dozen more mysteries whisper from the foundations. Yet the portrait that emerges is no longer a ghost. It is a vivid, if incomplete, masterpiece of human ingenuity, painted across the canvas of a lost coastal world. We have traced their footsteps from the fjords to the tropics, seen their hands in the interlocking stone, and heard the echo of their knowledge in the living traditions of the sea. The evidence, though fragmented, points with growing certainty to a profound reality. Long before the rise of pharaohs and emperors, before the invention of writing, a maritime people looked upon the wild ocean and saw not an end but a beginning. They built a civilization not of pyramids and palaces, but of observatories and harbors, a network of communities whose true monument was their mastery of the blue planet itself. Their story was ultimately rewritten by the rising seas, their greatest achievements submerged, their name forgotten. But in their stubborn refusal to vanish completely, in these wind-battered stones and persistent legends, they have left us a legacy far greater than a solved puzzle. They have given us a new lens through which to view the entire human journey. They challenge the comfortable, landlocked narrative of progress and remind us that history is not only found in libraries, but in the tidal pull of the moon on ancient shorelines. So let these cliffs do more than inspire wonder. Let them ignite a deeper, more humble curiosity. Walk your own coastline wherever you are in the world. Look at the strange rock formations, listen to the old local tales of floods and forgotten lands. Ask what came before the maps. The story of our past is still being written, wave by wave, discovery by discovery. What do you think these coastal ruins represent? Share your perspective in the comments below. Subscribe to continue exploring history's greatest hidden currents. And remember, the next chapter of our shared story might not be buried in the earth at all, but waiting just beyond the breakers where the land ends and the great blue mystery begins.